Warriors podcast. I'm Max.
I'm Rich.
And on this podcast, we will be covering the Weird War Tales comic book series published by DC Comics from 1971 to 1983. And on this episode in particular, we are taking a look at Weird War Tales number 66. But first, Rich has some stuff to say to you.
Our Fanboy 4 Intel report for our Valentine's Day episode stirred some interest from our listeners, so I'll go into a bit more detail about the series as a whole. As stated previously, Fanboy is the title of a 6-issue miniseries by Mark Evanier and Sergio Aragonés, which was published by DC Comics in 1999. Finster is a rabid comic book fan and comic book store employee who dreams of becoming a professional comic book artist. His daydreams are of classic comic book heroes with himself inserted as a sidekick. While Finster's everyday activities are illustrated by Aragonés, his daydreams are illustrated by Jerry Ordway, Frank Miller, Gil Kane, Neil Adams, Dick Sprang, Bill Sienkiewicz, Brent Anderson, Russ Heath, Joe Kubert, Marie Severin, Brian Bolland, Jim Mooney, Joe Giella, Bruce Timm, Kevin Nolan, Wendy Pinney, Jordi Burnett, Phil Jimenez, Bernie Wrightson, Matt Haley, Tom Simmons, Will Bleiberg, Dave Gibbons, Steve Rude, Dick Giordano, Mike Grell, and Dan Spiegel. Murderers Row. The covers also featured Finster added into homages of classic comic book covers, which was the one I did the Intel report for. It had a Kubert Rock cover on it. It's been collected as a trade paperback for those interested. I don't recall if I picked up the entire run and later ditched the other 5 books or just issue 4 because of the War Book tie-in. Certainly worth a gander with that lineup regardless. And hey, guess what I did? I found a YouTube video and found out how to finally say David Michelinie's name properly. Drinks all around. Max is buying. Michelinie. Michelinie. Intel report. Yeah, I'm here because, Max can't be trusted to actually do a whole show on his own, even if I do the script. Anywho. Who? Doctor Who. The 10th Doctor. Issues 6 to 9, published by Titan Comics from January-May 2015. Script of The Weeping Angels of Mons is by Robbie Morrison, art by Daniel Indro. When Gabby and the Doctor arrive by accident in No Man's Land in July 1916, the Battle of the Somme, they're met by Corporal Jamie Colquhoun, a soldier who knows from bitter experience there are worse things than the Jerrys out in the rat-strewn trenches. Things that drift through the smoke of 1,000 cannon shells and move only when you look away. Shadows that flit over artillery-blasted field hospitals and throw their terrifying wings over the living. Statues that steal your life in an instant. The Weeping Angels. But in a conflict where the life of young men is cheap and thousands die every day, are the angels actually offering salvation? I've never been a Doctor Who fan and stumbled on this story when I was looking for something else. I suppose it was only a matter of time before I found a Doctor Who Weird War story, though. Multiple covers per issue, and I added one to the Grand Comics database. Steve caught the TV episode of this story 10 years ago, and it scared the hell out of him. And just reading the story in a comic book, yeah, I get it. And maybe I'll have to watch it now, too. Moving on to the cover detail. Art by Joe Kubert, 35 cents. Weird War Tales is yellow on white. In the lower left corner, a P-38 Lightning plummets in flames towards the earth. The right side of the cover is the plane's pilot parachuting to safety, but he has a bewildered look on his face. For the rest of the cover is taken up by a huge orange flying dragon with red eyes that's looking back at him. A beautiful, scantily dressed blonde woman is sitting on his back, smiling, holding the reins that encompass its head. Cover date, August 1978. Date of release, May 9th, 1978. Old Comics Man, seen on eBay for anywhere between $300 and $800. There's apparently a rare Mark Jewelers variant CGC out there graded at 9.8. Killjoy, The USAF on the P-38's wing wasn't on U.S. aircraft during World War II, common killjoy of the war books. CNC. I don't know how often Joe drew dragons in other books, but I'm going to say he can draw them all he wants. The wings, the claws. He drew the big guy with an expression on his face that, to me anyway, does look particularly threatening. I suppose that makes sense because of the woman he's carrying on his back. I like the details of the parachute harness on the pilot too. Me like.
So anyway, hey, how you guys doing? I'm here. I didn't leave after the intro. So yeah, there's a lot going on with this cover, as you may have picked up on. And that starts with the literal layering of the three-tiered imagery that was described by my esteemed co-host. The foreground, as you heard, features our ejected pilot, grounding us firmly in reality with all the detail and immersion you'd expect from the master. You didn't even hear Rich complain about it. Then, one layer down, we enter into a world of whimsical fairy tale fantasy, mingled with a sense of imminent menace. The dragon, as Rich mentioned, not super threatening, has feathered wings as opposed to the clawed and leathery bat wings that usually adorn these creatures. And the general shape of the beast's body and face are more reminiscent of a softer style of amphibian, like a salamander, more on that later, than the scalier, rougher style of lizard used in more traditional depictions. Still, the dragon's blood-red eyes align with its perfectly sharp claws and fangs to add a sizable sense of menace back into the mix. Then, of course, there's the dragon's smiling, sprightly rider, dressed for a night out at the club, flashing a welcoming smile and a whole lot of leg, even in the aftermath of what she and her steeds seem to have just finished doing. Just down there, in the third layer of the image, we see the fiery wreck of the plane that our rugged and realistic pilot has just escaped from. In my opinion, this is an all-time cover for any series, I say, and especially for Weird War Tales. We are off to a great start.
Full-length battle tale, baby. The Iron Star. 17 pages. Script by first-timer Bob Toomey. Art by first-timer and Air Force veteran Tom Sutton. In the early days of World War II, Major Saul Jericho pilots an experimental P-38 Lightning through the autumn skies. The last pilot to fly one of these experimental numbers was killed when a power dive ripped off the wings. Now it's my turn to try the patience of the gods. He takes a deep breath, knuckles white on the controls, and pushes the twin-engine fighter into a power dive with a terminal velocity of 700 miles an hour. G pressure rapidly builds. Something has to give. Somewhere, a great wheel turns, polarities shift, and a gulf yawns open between two universes. The lightning vanishes from one realm and appears in another. On the world we know, Sir Isaac Newton codified the basic laws of modern physics and ushered in the age of science. But in the realm of Major Saul Jericho has just entered, Sir Isaac Newton codified the basic laws of modern thaumaturgy and ushered in the age of magic. Major Saul Jericho has just been catapulted into the Weird War, a war fought with witchcraft and sorcery in the eerie universe of the Iron Star. A dragon is startled by the sudden appearance of the flying machine, and it blasts it with a burst of its fiery breath, breaking the plane in half. Not knowing what happened, Jericho bails out of his crippled bird. He doesn't see the blonde-haired woman in the red cloak and a white two-piece sitting on the dragon's back with a white cat hissing beside her. Easy, Hector, we've been waiting for this. Calm yourself, Widdershins. A witch's cat is supposed to be inscrutable. As Jericho shoots to safety, he's convinced he's hallucinating as a giant glowing green hand rises from a palace that's also glowing green and catches the largest piece of his falling plane. He lands on the back of a flying dragon with a woman and a cat. How do you do? The woman says. My name is Sybil. Pleased to meet you? You're probably finding things a little strange right now. Don't worry. You're not losing your mind. Everything will be explained when we land at my father's castle. Wonderful! You're not only a beautiful hallucination, you're also a rich hallucination. I'm beginning to enjoy this nervous breakdown. At the palace, Amagus and General argue as the wrecked lightning is placed on the ground before them. The plan was doomed from the start. The flying machine is useless and... Silence, Dashwood. I've heard enough of your vile recriminations. You've squandered an enormous amount of mana and all for nothing. I intend to call for your dismissal. Sybil, Jericho, and Widdershins approach the two men. No, my father and General Dashwood are arguing again. I despise Dashwood. He wants to replace my father as Magus. Come on, my father wants to meet you. I was just thinking, what if all this is real and I'm the hallucination? Maybe I better stop thinking about it. Jericho has accepted the shuffle. Now he must learn the rules of the game. A quick check confirms the lightning will never fly again, and he asks what the hell is going on. We're fighting a war, Major Jericho, Magus Crafton exclaims. 6 months ago, the powers of darkness violated an ancient covenant. Someone incredibly evil, a human we think, called the demon leaders together and offered them our world. This evil man was apparently eloquent enough to sway the demons to turn their minds to conquest. His impregnable headquarters are there, in Castle Ravenstone. Sybil gestures to a distant castle sitting atop a stony spire. But what am I doing here? Jericho asks. I fear that is my doing. I summoned you here from your universe. At great cost, Dashwood interrupts. To help us destroy Ravenstone. A growling noise makes Jericho turn, and he pulls out his .45 as a wolf staggers into view. Sybil grabs his arm. No, Major, it's Rufus, one of ours. He's a scout of one of our night patrols. Rufus transforms from wolf to man. Oh, yeah, sure. I should have realized that immediately. You have news? Yes, bad news. My patrol was ambushed. We were combing the hills west of here, and I was scouting ahead for signs of enemy activity. When I returned to my patrol, a Gorgon was standing in the clearing, turning the men to stone. It got worse after that. A team of trolls entered the clearing and began to shatter the petrified men with hammers. The trolls then gathered up the fragments that were once my friends and began to hurl them at the fleeing survivors of the patrol. I attacked the trolls to divert them and give the survivors a chance to escape. But when I overtook the last of our patrol, I saw that their terrified flight had driven them into a bog of quicksand. My friends, all of them, are dead. You see, now even the trolls and Gorgons have joined the enemy forces, Sybil says. But what am I doing here? I'm just an ordinary man. General Dashwood explodes. No, you are not an ordinary man. I don't believe you are human at all. You are a construct of the enemy, a simulacrum in human guise. The creature was sent here by the enemy to destroy us. We must destroy him first. I demand we test this creature by fire. Then we will know the truth. I like the sound of this, Jericho mutters. Sybil agrees. It is a terrible thing, but you must take the test. Otherwise, my father will be discredited. The four go to Dashwood's chamber, where a large, deep fire pit blazes. An incantation from Dashwood makes the flames climb higher. Sybil explains what Jericho is to do. You will walk across, supported by the truth. Do it. Prove General Dashwood wrong. Come, sneers Dashwood. Walk across the pit, if you dare. Like a swimmer testing the water, Jericho tests the air. It supports his weight, and he hesitantly steps out over the pit. The flames do not burn. Yet. Name yourself now. Are you human? I'm human. You want my rank and serial number 2? Jericho passes the test and steps safely back on the floor. Well done, young man. I always had faith in you. Suddenly, a massive shape etched in flame erupts from the pit. My God, it's a salamander! It's broken through our defense perimeter using your pit as a gateway. Dashwood, you're a fool! The Magus waves his hands in the air. I abjure you and command you. Return to the nether flames that give you birth. Depart, depart, depart! But the salamander doesn't leave. It likes this place. Crafton can barely restrain it. Look, I'm new here, but I got an idea, Jericho says to the Magus. For this, we'll need dragons. You always need dragons. The attack is swiftly organized, and soon the 4 dragons with riders swoop in on their target.
As the dragons blast with their fiery breaths, The salamander swells and swells. The Magus can barely hold on until the fire elemental explodes in a shower of harmless sparks. What do you know? It worked, Jericho exclaims. Crofton is confused about what has happened until Jericho explains, that thing was pure energy, feeding on itself. I figured it was hungry, so I fed it more energy. It ate itself to death. Say, where's Sybil? Last I saw her, she was with Dashwood. They're gone! Magus Crafton gestures as he concentrates. His mind reaches out, and a vision appears that the two men can see. Dashwood has joined the enemy! His fire pit was a ploy, the salamander a diversion. He's taken my daughter to Castle Ravenstone! Crafton continues the story as they walk back to Jericho's lightning. Ravenstone is protected by a star of cold iron that fell from the sky. All magic is neutralized within the Iron Star's radius of power. Iron Star? A meteorite? That is why I summoned you in your flying machine. I see. You wanted a weapon that doesn't depend on magic. Was I supposed to destroy this Iron Star? Not destroy it. Cast it into the void. Castle Ravenstone is built at the Earth's edge, looking over the great abyss of space. With the Iron Star eliminated, my spells could capture the castle. But your flying machine is ruined, and now my daughter is in the hands of the enemy. The situation is hopeless. Jericho gazes at the wrecked plane, and an idea comes to mind. Don't give up yet. I can get into the castle. Maybe. But I'll need some help. Can you spare me a couple carpenters? Jericho and 6 carpenters spend hours taking parts off the Lightning and placing them on a wooden rig of a plane. Using a knife, he slices strips off the Lightning's tires and turns them into a giant rubber band, which is placed inside the rig's fuselage and wound as tight as possible by the propeller. In the morning, Hector takes the wooden craft in his claws and flies it, Jericho and Widdershins, toward Castle Ravenstone. As soon as the dragon feels the Iron Star's effects, he releases the plane. Jericho lets go of the brake that keeps the rubber band wound, and the strange wooden contraption continues on its way to Ravenstone. The rubber band provides just enough power to direct the flight, and as it passes over the castle, Jericho and Widdershins bail out. 3 guards see Jericho drifting toward them, and the American guns them down with his .45 as he lands on the rampart. Dropping his chute, he and the cat run down a flight of stairs into the castle, into another reception committee. Again, Jericho fires his pistol and clears a path into a chamber where Dashwood awaits, standing next to a mounted large iron star, the size of a shield. We meet again. Do you intend to blast me with your terrible weapon? Drop your sword, then we'll discuss it, Dashwood. Dashwood refuses, so Jericho raises his pistol and pulls the trigger. There's only a loud click. The .45 is empty. Dashwood's sword flashes out of his scabbard as Jericho drives to scoop up a sword of his own that had been dropped by one of his fallen guards. Several times, sword crashes against sword as the two adversaries duel. Seeing the star, Jericho speaks to Dashwood. Don't tell me. I'll bet this is the fabulous Iron Star. Yes, but you'll never take it. All right then, you take it. Grabbing the star with one hand from its mount, he throws it at Dashwood. The impact knocks Dashwood off his feet and renders him unconscious. Jericho quickly ties him up. I guess you couldn't take it. C'est la guerre! The star is heavier than it looks, but Jericho muscles it into a window and hurls it into the aforementioned abyss. Farewell, Iron Star. I envy you. At least you're going home. A quick search of the castle soon finds Sybil chained to a wall in a cell, and as Jericho releases her, she throws her arms around him. "Where'd the boss bad guy go?" he asks. "He's a were creature," Sybil responds. "As soon as magic became possible again, he changed into his other form." "What sort of were creature? A wolf like Rufus?" "No, a mouse. He probably started all of this because he felt inferior. I wonder what happened to him." Neither of the duo see Widdershins, the cat, sitting in the corner licking his chops after his very recent meal of a mouse. The end.
Ta-da! Killjoy was here. History Minute. What? A History Minute in a sword and sorcery comic? Yes, sir! Assuming that when Death is talking about the early days of World War II on page 1, panel 1, he means before the US was involved. Okay, the P-38 was still being flight tested in 1939. But if that's the case, the insignia on the plane is from 1942. And on page 1, panel 1, it's on the wrong wing. This happens a few times in various panels of the story. Pick your Killjoy. On the last page of the story, Death says, "Saul Jericho, Major, USAAF, retired." What's retired major doing test flying fighters in World War II? And was anyone allowed to retire during the war other than medically? All hands on deck for the duration plus 6 months. So, in the beginning of the story, Jericho says the last pilot to fly this experimental job got killed when the wings were torn off. Ralph Verdon was a Lockheed test pilot flying his P-38 through a dive test November 1941, when the airplane pitched maniacally and became nearly uncontrollable of what was later came to be known as Mach Tuck. The twin-engine Lightning, gaining speed in the dive, was still well below the speed of sound, but the air accelerating over its wing was moving faster than the airplane itself. When Verdon hit Mach 675, about 510 miles an hour, the airflow over the wings became supersonic. A shockwave leapt life over the wing stubs between the fighter's lozenge-like cockpit cab and its engine nacelles. The inboard wings suddenly stalled and the airplane slumped. The usually strong airstream that the wings guided back and down onto the fighter's horizontal tail ceased, no longer counterbalancing the weight of the engines in the forward structure. The nose rotated down and tucked. This wouldn't have come as a surprise to Verdon. The P-38 designer Kelly Johnson had been one of the first to postulate the effects of compressibility, the baffling behavior of air moving at supersonic speeds. So the P-38 that Verdon was flying, one of the first of the twin boom fighters to be built, had a raised tail, which had already been fitted with several devices to give it more muscle in the inevitable struggle to regain balanced flight. What Johnson and Verdon didn't know, because Lockheed's wind tunnel couldn't simulate speeds as high as its P-38 could reach, were the exact locations and various strengths of the pressures working on the aircraft. So when Verdon activated the spring-loaded servo tabs on the elevator, he thought that would help him wrench the tail back down. They worked too well. The forces of the dive recovery pulled the airplane's tail off, and Verdon died in the ensuing crash. Future test pilots were sometimes able to pull out of the dive when the plane reached thicker lower air at lower altitudes. After Verdon crashed, Kelly Johnson, desperate to find a cure for the P-38's woes, sent a model to the National Advisory Committee for Aeronautics for wind tunnel tests. NACA is now part of NASA. NACA suggested an elegant solution to the problem, an all-moving, trimmable horizontal stabilizer, one of the design features that allowed the Bell X-1 to maintain control as Chuck Yeager flew through the sound barrier on October 14, 1947. But in the middle of a war with almost 700 fighters on order, the company couldn't afford the time for the redesign. Instead, the NACA developed small wedge-shaped dive flaps that were popped out of the underside of the wings at the first sign of Mach Tuck. Many to this day assume that the dive flaps simply slowed the airplanes below shockwave speed, but the truth is they restored enough of the wing's lost lift to enable the pilot to pull out despite the tail's recalcitrance. They worked well enough to be installed on some of the P-38's contemporaries, P-47 fighters, A-26 attack bombers, and the two early U.S. jets, the P-59 and the P-80. The P-38 flew in every theater of the war. The Germans called it the fork-tailed devil, but it excelled in the Pacific, shooting down over 1,800 Japanese aircraft, including that of Admiral Yamamoto, the planner of the Pearl Harbor attack. America's top two highest scoring aces of all time, Richard Bong and Thomas Maguire, both flew P-38s in the Pacific, 40 and 38 kills respectively. Earned the Medal of Honor and died before the war was over, both in accidents at low altitude. So I guess the problem was fixed. I thought Artist Sutton was the Air Force vet. Toomey did a grade A job referencing the compressibility problem on the first 2 pages of the book. Max?
Again, damn. I didn't as you'll see when I get into my CNC here, I really appreciated Bob Toomey's writing, but I had no idea, because I just don't know these things, that he was that on point. So even more kudos to him. So kicking off our comments and commendations, and not to step on my co-host toes, as I'd rather just drop a rock on him, I'm going to mingle my CNC with some mythological mystery minute material. Are you ready? Too bad, here it comes. As I did with my comments on the cover of this issue, my discussion of the fanciful fragments featured in this fable will be threefold. First off, we have the title and titular MacGuffin of this tale, the Iron Star. Any fantasy or fairy tale nerd worth their protective circle salt will know that iron has a long and storied history within tales of magic and otherworldly creatures. Often referred to in such myths and legends as cold iron or sky iron, the properties of metal objects formed from meteorites fallen from the skies is often said to have negative or even lethal effects on magical creatures in various myths from all over the world. And it's also frequently said to be able to cancel magical effects or spells, just as the Iron Star is shown to be capable of in this issue of our beloved series. Next up, as Rich alludes to in his own CNC, we have the surname of this story's protagonist, Jericho. In Judeo-Christian biblical lore, this name is intertwined with the imagery of fallen walls, barriers removed, God's promises fulfilled, and so on. Also, within the issue's story itself, it is mentioned that our Jericho will be trying the patience of the gods. So pretty well tied in. You have fallen walls where he crosses over from one reality to another, promises fulfilled with the prophecies, stuff like that. Again, another layer going on here where the images used are used properly and to good effect. So thirdly, and finally, we have the appearance of, as I mentioned, a salamander as a gigantic flaming creature of elemental menace, as opposed to the harmless and squishy amphibians that we're far more familiar with. This phenomenon of a salamander being a fiery monster has its roots in the writings of Paracelsus, a Swiss philosopher who lived from 1493 to 1541, in a posthumously published book entitled A Book on Nymphs, or Undines in some translations, Sylphs, Pygmies, or Gnomes in some translations, and Salamanders, and on the other spirits. So that title is A Book on Nymphs, Sylphs, Pygmies, and Salamanders, and on the other spirits. Paracelsus also described 4 elemental beings, each corresponding to one of the 4 elements. Guess what? Salamanders, which correspond to fire, gnomes, corresponding to earth, undines, water, and sylphs, air. He chose the term salamander for the fire elementals as a nod to the ancient, but easily disproved even at the time, belief that the actual amphibians of salamanders, the actual amphibian salamanders could survive if tossed into a fire. So, the depiction of a fantastical salamander as having something like the physical form of the real-world animal is just one of the fun, super convoluted conflations that happen over the course of history when it comes to fact, fiction, and beyond. Okay. How about I get to my, what do we call them? Comments and commendations? Right. Okay, fine. The opening page of our story is a bit crowded, but I did enjoy the printing shenanigans that made the first mention of her protagonist's surname appear to be Jerko rather than Jericho, calling Colonel Kerning. And As I alluded to in our previous episode, during the teaser for this one, I am a longtime super fan of Tom Sutton's artwork, owing mostly to my having collected and devoured countless Charlton horror comics back in the day, and I'm recollecting a lot of them now, as we all tend to do in life as comic nerds. So I'll try not to weigh down this section of the show any further by gushing and raving about every single drawing in every single panel of this issue. However, I simply have to stop and praise the magnificence of the 2-page spread that explodes out at us after we turn that somewhat crowded first page. Actually, before I get to the imagery, I'd like to comment on Death's dialogue between his two selves up top across both pages, implying that Isaac Newton had chosen science or magic as the basis for the laws of each universe, each respective universe, as a result of his own personal observations and opinions. Like, Grant Morrison, is that you? So if Isaac Newton, his theories proved gravity and all that, like, then we would have science as what rules the universe. But if his experiments went towards thaumaturgy instead, the whole universe would be retroactively and forevermore ruled by magic. That does sound like a Grant Morrison style, our brains and our beliefs can affect actual reality type stuff. And we're not even below the top third of the second and third page here. So again, this is an ambitious story with pretty damn good writing in my opinion. And then down below that very cool depiction of the divided duality of our deathly maitre d', we have the unrestrained swagger of one Struttin' Sutton, folks. Our dragon is made of rougher stuff here than it was on the cover, but his being named Hector by his somewhat more Red Riding Hoodish mistress adds perhaps more whimsy to the creature than his softer features did on the cover of the book. Add to that the dragon's acceptance of the equally delightfully named feline passenger of one Widdershins the witch's cat, and the fairy tale elements are certainly more than amply represented here on this 2-page spread. And as much as I knew I would enjoy the art of Mr. Sutton in this issue, again, as I've already leaked out here, I gotta say I was very pleasantly surprised by the style and tone of Bob Toomey's writing throughout. As in the first of the pop-out panels on this spread where Jericho is proclaiming that his mind is starting to dissolve. Like, the unexpected character to the pilot's vocabulary and his turns of phrase are consistent throughout the issue, and I really enjoyed it. Speaking of the creative contributions to this issue, folks, just look at the rest of that lineup. John Workman on letters, Tatiana Wood on colors. The deck is stacked for this issue. So I didn't want to just rave about Tom Sutton as I probably would have if I didn't restrain myself. We've got some great people on this team, and again, Bob Toomey, who I'm not super familiar with, turns out to be very impressive in and of himself. Now, I know I said I'd keep this brief, and believe me, I am, but I gotta call out panel 5 on page 4, which is of course just super cool to look at. But again, I need to mention Jericho's dialogue, as you heard it in the synopsis, but I loved it. Like, I'm beginning to enjoy this hallucination. He really has, the character here really has kind of a Han Solo style wise ass thing going on. And I like it. Page 5, panel 1 gives us the aforementioned Green Lantern hand that Rich calls out. But I was also reminded of the classic Carmine Infantino narrative hands that would point out flash facts and other things in his classic Silver Age stories. They had kind of that rendering just to the anatomy of the hand. I gotta believe it was a nod to those as well. And in panel 5, moving right down to panel 5 here, I gotta give even more kudos to Toomey's writing. With the narrative caption, again, you heard it in the synopsis, Jericho has accepted the shuffle. Now he must learn the rules of the game. It's a great way to phrase things, and it's consistent with the rough and tumble, take it all in stride nature of our very pulpy protagonist. It's just so on point. On page 6, I really like the moody coloring in the first two panels. You know I'm a sucker for that. Breaking the realism, going for the mood instead with the coloring. And Tatiana Wood is one of the best. And I would be seriously remiss if I didn't mention my delight at the arrival of Rufus in panel 4. As Rich knows, one of the bestest buddies I ever had was my beloved canine Rufus, who was a golden retriever with much the same coloring as the canine character that appears in the pages of this comic. So that was just nice. Made me think of my old dog. Page 7 is excellent on many levels, featuring 7 panels with flashback narration and a simply iconic Tom Sutton horror face in panel 2. Now, you haven't seen much of the Tom Sutton I grew to love in this story because he mostly drew horror comics for Charlton. This has been a very fanciful and whimsical, if action-packed story, but on that drawing in particular, you see a little hint of the horror artist that Tom Sutton is normally known to be. And the Dungeons and Dragons nerd within me simply squealed at the depiction of the magical tactics used in combat by the mythological creatures in Rufus's flashback story. You know, them all working together with petrification and breaking this, like each creature using different tactics with each other was it just reeked of a really good D&D combat session. Plus, quicksand. Yeah, we're still in the 70s, people. Quicksand is everywhere. It doesn't matter if your universe is based on science or magic. Quicksand is there, and it'll kill you. And as a comic nerd of many colors, I gotta mention that the trolls in that flashback reminded me very much of the Marvel Comics Iron Man and Hulk enemies known as the Gargoyle and the Gremlin. They're father and son. Look them up, people. I'll jump ahead a bit and nitpick a little here, because I got to, and say that on page 11, it seemed like Dashwood's fire pit trial was a ploy of some kind, but it kind of seemed like it was a long-standing tradition when Jericho was being dragged off to it before. And if it was a ploy, you'd think they'd have figured that. But anyway, just a little hiccup. I had to find something to nitpick, and that was really it. Okay, very minor. Ah, well. But then on page 13, we get Jericho preparing to pilot a rubber band plane. If you're of a certain age, you know you built and launched more than a few of these back in the day. And again, in the interest of fairness, I gotta mention that the depiction of here's another nitpick. I'm sorry, I forgot I had another one, but this one just jumps out at you. What should have been Jericho's super cool handgun attack in panel 1 of page 15 is just one of the silliest attempts at showing something like that I've ever seen in a comic book. Deadlines, However, rip-roaring pulp action was never one of Sutton's strengths, and apropos of that, it's also interesting, as I said, to see him drawing a tale with very little in the way of the moody, atmospheric horror elements that his work was usually suffused with. Giving the writing another tip of the cap, and I promise I'm almost done, I liked the use of C'est la guerre in panel 5 of page 16. Perhaps for our purposes, that should have been C'est la guerre bizarre. And yes, we get an ending where a cat gets to eat the bad guy. So I like it, even if the way we get to it is pretty whack, as the kids said in the mid-90s, even for this series. I'll still take it. Gee, I wonder if I enjoyed this issue. Can you tell?
Spaceballs call out. Didn't Pizza the Hut eat himself to death too? I just thought of that while we were recording. Better late than never for scripting purposes. I wonder if there wasn't some biblical tie-in Toomey had in mind naming the pilot Jericho in the story. I never watched Breaking Bad, but the Magus must have. Got a problem? Better call Saul. Hello? Is this thing on? Hello? The two-page splash of the jumpy dragon destroying the P-38 over the Green Castle as Death narrates is gold, as Max already said, although some of the detail work on the plane in that panel leaves a bit to be desired. We are off and running! The cat's name is oddly amusing too. I think I'd be less scared of the dragon than I would be of a magical Green Lantern catching my plane with a giant hand, page 4, panel 1. The first panel on the next page only solidifies the whole GL vibe. Did Sutton work on that character? According to GCD, he did not. But here's where I catch a late killjoy. Panels 1 and 5 of page 5 show different wings torn off through wrecked lightning. Same with page 12, panel 2, page 13, panel 1. Consistency! I liked Jericho's, "Oh yeah, the wolf is obviously on our side," remark on page 6, panel 6. He has a nice amount of banter throughout this book. All of page 7 is Rufus's flashback of the patrol being wiped out. Really like it. But I also have to say the trolls are all running around going, "Ah, ah, ah," and they look like miniaturized versions of Sinestro. There's that Green Lantern tie-in again. The last 3 panels on page 13 work for me too, of the construction of the rubber band powered glider and the way they use Hector to get into the position for their attack on Ravenstone. And I have to say, throughout the book, Sutton goes out of his way working on the details of the sky in this realm, the stars, clouds, magical vortexes, or whatever they are. Real colorful and real eye-catching. Also giving the creative team points for remembering a 45 only carries 7 bullets, unless you have one in the chamber, which is generally not recommended. A pilot would have no reason to do that anyway. Fire 7 times and he's empty. And of course, the cat, the unsung hero, taking out the boss bad guy unseen. So, does Jericho get to go home now? Or does he stay in the realm of flying dragons, magic, and a hot Magus's daughter? What would you do? I know what I'll do. I'll go to the APO Weird War Tales and read a letter from Bob Worrell from 1219 Bernhard Road, Columbus, Ohio, 43227. Dear Paul, issue 61 is the first war comic I can think of that has a socially redeeming quality. If there's a right war to show war is wrong, then it's not by using history as an example, but by showing what the next war can be like. I'd like to see more issues like number 61. I won't buy any of the others, and you'll know why. There's a vast area to be covered in science fiction and future war, an area as interesting as it is valid. The stories could be informative rather than preachy. I suppose DC has several war books, so what if you turn just one of them into something good? Ooh, how dare you, sir? Now, the response is, we like to believe that all the magazines we edit have some socially redeeming value, Bob, and that there's more than one way to get our message across effectively. Still, if you're looking for more SF and Weird War, your wish will be granted. Beginning next issue, we're moving up to a new format with 25 pages of new story and art in every monthly issue. So we'll have more room to experiment and entertain. Don't be surprised if SF shows up in these pages as a regular basis then. Apologies for trimming your letter so drastically, Bob, but we felt you had a point that was worth making, even if there wasn't room to develop as fully as you had. So I wonder how much of a rant he went on if they cut apparently like 3/4 of his letter out, it sounds like. Turn one of them into something good. How dare you, sir? How dare you?
Yeah. Again, Paul Levitt's far more diplomatic than I would have been. My goodness. What the heck? So for my letter, I had to pick this guy's letter because I mangled his last name last time, but it's still fun to say correctly. My letter comes from Mr. Beppe Sabatini of 515 Division Street, East Lansing, Michigan, 488223. And he kicks off his missive as follows. Dear Paul, well, congratulations on the best issue of Weird War Tales in a long, long time. I'd say your little experiment with a theme issue, number 61, was quite a success. And in fact, you really ought to consider leaning the whole book a bit more towards science fiction. Little theme there from the other letter. The cover and first story of this issue were prime shaken. Much better than the stuff he's been doing for Marvel. I don't know why it is that DC so often gets better results out of the same personnel, but I've noticed it a lot. The script was pretty typical and consequently pretty dull, but the story was still a gem. In fact, you could say the same thing about the Nino story, but it was pretty remarkable artwork for such a dull story. Of course, There's so little science fiction in comics that even the old cliche plots don't seem so old. So, good work. You can keep it up, and you'll make Weird War Tales a comic I'll look forward to. And I wonder why he keeps buying them if he's not been looking forward to them. But okay. Paul's response says, there was a rousing male response to number 61, so we succeeded in at least that dimension. This page presents a fair sampler, both in range, glowing to grating, and proportion, 2-to-1 positive. So if sales back it up, we'll probably have another SF issue in the fall. Meanwhile, this issue is our long-promised sword and sorcery novel, and it's very special to us. Please drop us a line and let us know if it had the same effect on you. Paul Levitt. So I do like the interactivity going on in this letters page. People are engaging with Paul about his stated, mission to kind of put more themes into the books and have more themed issues and bring in things that aren't just World War II stories. And people are giving him feedback, whether it's grating or not. I kind of dig that. So, pretty darn good letters page, really. I think Paul just has kind of a nice touch. He's a legendary editor for a reason. So, APO Weird War Tales being out of the way and all that, and the story content being over, you know what time it is, folks. It's time to check out our spotlighted ads for this issue. Now, again, I have to mention more than one, as I always do, but I mean, we had a rubber band powered plane in the storyline here. So I got to mention the Tester's Glider ad that appears, I believe, on the back cover of the issue. And just because that's something else, we were all building these little cardboard or plywood or whatever they were made out of, just pulpy gliders, whether they were powered by rubber bands or not. So it was neat to see one of those ads on the back of this issue that had a rubber band plane inside the actual action of the story. And we had all the ads and the publishorial from Jeanette Kahn getting us ready for the DC explosion, which, as we've heard me mention before, is ironic because what came right on the heels of that was the DC implosion, because the explosion failed. That's always nice for me to see. But my real spotlighted ad for this issue is the double page spread of the infamous Clark Bar ad. The infamous Clark Bar ad is infamous because it was a huge contest that was being run. And we'll get to whether or not we know if anyone ever won that contest or anything like that. But this being a DC comic, it's a 2-page spread with bold print up top that says, you could win a trip to Gotham and appear in a superhero comic book. And in the center of the ad down below, there's the figures of DC Comics famous characters: Batman, Robin, Aquaman, Superman, and Wonder Woman in the foreground. The text of the contest in the ad is as follows. Okay, all you characters out there, here's your big chance to be a real character, comic book style. You don't have to buy anything or do anything, sounds like my kind of contest, except to mail us the famous Clark Bar Superhero Sweepstakes entry blank with your name and address. To find out what could be in it for you, just read on. Now, here are the first, second, and third prizes. If you're lucky enough to win the first prize, Clark will fly you and your family, limit of 4 people, to New York City and back. Gotham, New York City, that they used to be interchangeable terms, people, until DC decided Gotham was in New Jersey. But I digress. You'll stay for 3 days and 2 nights, all expenses paid. We'll take you on a tour of the DC Comics offices so an artist can draw you into an upcoming issue of your favorite DC comic book. You'll be part of the action right along with one of DC's famous comic book superheroes. You'll have plenty of free time in Gotham, too, for seeing the Statue of Liberty, taking boat rides, or just looking up at tall buildings a lot and saying, wow. Sounds a little condescending there. And when your comic book adventure is published, we'll send you 15 copies for your family and friends. They'll be proud to know a famous person like you. Second prize in the Clark Bar contest is if you're one of the 22nd prize winners, you'll get your choice of famous superhero watches. Superman, Spider-Man, Wonder Woman, Batman. Or if your taste should happen to run to supervillains instead, the Joker. The watches are Swiss made with full color superhero pictures and would normally sell for $19.95 to $23.95. Third prize is a set of steak knives. No, it is if you're one of 100 third prize winners, we'll send you a year's subscription to your favorite DC or Marvel comic book. Get that DC or Marvel comic book. The Incredible Hulk, Red Sonja, Thor, Green Lantern, Plastic Man, Captain America, Wonder Woman, Justice Society, Ms. Marvel, you name it, even Little Lulu. Little Lulu was a Harvey comic? Oh, okay, fine. Whatever. So find yourself a pen or pencil, fill in the entry blank, please print as you do so, and mail your entry to us before November 1st, 1978. Who knows? It could make you as famous as the famous Clark bars. And then we have like a bunch of the prizes you could win. Besides that, on the other side, it says, be a winner all year long with wrappers from famous Clark bars. Okay, you just read about, what you just read about was a contest. This isn't. What this is a terrific way to get famous superhero premiums anytime you want them by collecting wrappers from any of the famous Clark and Holloway products. Clark, Crispy, Zagnut, Crunchy, Crunchy Light, Peanut Butter Log, Milk Duds, Slowpoke, or Black Cow. Here's what you can get, and the order blank is in the next page. So all year long, doesn't matter about the contest or whatever, you can get things like Frisbees, flashlights, stickers, kites. You can get the watches too, super posters, super lamps, some sunglasses, super parachutists, utility belts, which, $475 plus 4 wrappers get you a Batman or Spider-Man utility belt. Not bad. Radio controlled vehicles, all a bunch of crap with superhero stuff plastered onto it for just a nominal fee and some candy bar wrappers. So there you go. That's the big ad. And we all saw it if we were buying comics from this period. It was plastered through comics from both DC and Marvel. As you notice there, they mention characters from both companies. It was one of those rare things where it wasn't just licensed to DC or Marvel. And they mentioned characters from both companies in the same ad. Sure, the art in this one just features DC Comics characters exclusively, but I went, on the internet and pretty quickly found the art from the Marvel version that would appear in their books. And that has the Thing, the Hulk, Spider-Man, Captain America, and Red Sonja up front. So instead of, Wonder Woman, you get Red Sonja in the Marvel version. So it's just interesting to me to see that we had an ad that would mention both of these competing companies, and they didn't alter the text that much, just the art in the center. So I wonder what it took to get them to both collaborate together. What I also wonder, and I could not find any evidence of, is who won the first prize. Did anyone win it? Did anyone appear? There's nothing out there. I can find no evidence. So if anyone can do better research than me, or knows who won especially the first prize, let us know.
Yeah, your ad was actually, you said it was a centerfold ad, but it was actually like a 4-page ad, like front, back. It starts with, holy taste buds, it's the famous Clark Bar superhero sweepstakes, with like the hand punching a Clark Bar through the paper of the ad and everything. So, and
oh yeah. I was just like getting to
my copy of the comic has in addition to that 4-page centerfold, there was a separate 4-page centerfold pull-out ad for Mark Jewelers with higher grade paper in the middle of your ad, rings and pendants mostly. Just saying, I imagine this is one of those things that got pulled out and thrown away a lot by the kids. But no, that's not my ad. Okay. And Hostess Twinkies and Suzy Q cupcakes. Now, I know what you're thinking. Not again. But hold the phone, Central. This isn't our standard superhero saves the day with a bunch of fattening snack cakes, comic strips. Wow, that's hard to say. This is an actual ad. Big double play. Great Hostess cakes. Get your mitts on these Hostess Big Leaguers. Hostess cupcakes. Rich, moist doubles food cake covered with chocolatey icing. Twinkies cakes. Golden sponge cake and cream filling. Winning combination. Free baseball cards. 3 full-color cards printed on the bottom of every specially marked box of Twinkies cakes, Suzy Q's, Hostess cupcakes, and other Hostess cakes. 150 big league baseball cards with statistics. Top half has a baseball glove reaching in from the right and catching a Twinkie and a cupcake. The bottom half has a baseball glove reaching in from the left and catching about a half dozen baseball cards. Now, the physics on both of these catches is suspect, to say the least. Both snack cakes are going to land side by side in the glove. Amazing! But admittedly possible. I'm much more skeptical of the flutter factor of a bunch of baseball cards doing the same and not being scattered all over the yard like some poor boy version of 52 pickup. Side note, I had the indescribable joy of teaching that game to my young son and his friends. I remember baseball cards coming on boxes like this, and you had to carefully cut them out. Goes without saying that none of those cards were worth a damn thing, which I know wasn't the point. So, got any last words? Of course I got last words. I have no doubt that Max will have a lot more to say about this book than I will. I'm not a sword and sorcery guy. That's my co-host's corner. But from my limited experience, I have to say this checks all the boxes. Good cover, good story, good art, consistency issues with lightning wings notwithstanding, a fun ad and a teaser on the letters page. I'll chalk this one up as an overall win.
Yeah, I did have a lot to say about this book, and as you all just got through listening to me yammer, and I was holding back. Even I didn't want this to be a 3-hour episode, so I don't say this often, and I'll never even admit that I said it this time, but I think I've said enough about this issue already. This is one of my favorite issues of this series yet, and you all knew it would be. I will also mention that I listened to a 1970s prog rock playlist while I wrote my part of this script. You had Rush, Yes, Jethro Tull, Styx, you name it. Good times were had, man. That's it for the story content and everything, people. And normally we're moving on to the section at the end of the show called the Scuttlebutt. And it's kind of going to be a heavy one this time, people. And I'll let Rich tell you what that's all about.
Instead of going down or, hey, buy our merch and get a Samstar blurb that we usually put here, I'd like to take this time for a personal moment. On March 4th, my father died of complications due to Alzheimer's disease on his 84th birthday. My parents were married 57 years. We've made comments on the show about how the apple didn't fall far from the tree where my son is concerned. Well, it's also true going a generation in the other direction. I've talked about my son and grandfather here, but I'm just now realizing I've never talked about my dad. I'm 6'1", and he was a bit taller than me. He was the original owner of a 1963 red TR4 Triumph sports car that he picked my mom up in on their blind date, and he tweaked it mechanically several times to increase performance in autocrosses. Sadly, he had a medical episode which was probably in the early stages of the disease while driving it and totaled it. Never did get to drive it. He was the dad in Calvin and Hobbes who delivered the straight man deliveries to his kids, and we had to ask Mom if he was telling us the truth. I discovered Monty Python through him and enjoyed his howls of laughter watching Ministry of Silly Walks. He enjoyed watching the classic Warner Brothers cartoons with us, especially the Roadrunner, Bugs Bunny, Daffy Duck feuds, and the Three Bears shorts. My first comics were old DC war books that he and his brothers had read in the 60s that I found in my grandparents' attic. He taught me how to drive a stick, to ski downhill, to swim, and use a boat. I took him and my son on 3-generation road trips later in life that I've mentioned and enjoyed taking him out to a beer at the Legion. I successfully nominated him to be an Olympic torchbearer for the 2002 Winter Games in Salt Lake City. That torch has a place of honor in my home now. He had a huge HO scale train layout in the basement of the 1940s New York Central system, and he corrected every minute error or omission on the brass engines. Engineer, writer, artist, photographer, and one of the funniest and smartest people I've ever known. So it goes without saying, I'm dedicating this show to my father, Peter Fulham. And in lieu of contemplating buying our merch, I instead ask that you go to an Alzheimer's or dementia website and make a donation to combat this terrible affliction. 7 million Americans have been diagnosed with Alzheimer's. They call it the long goodbye, as your loved one is slowly robbed of their identity inch by inch. It's an awful thing to watch. My grandfather, the one that worked on the Manhattan Project and was a pioneer in electron microscopy, Ernie, also died from complications of dementia. So this is very personal to me, and it makes me worry about my own future. Thanks all, and I love you, Dad.
Yeah, I can only echo everything Rich just said and add that, Rich, your dad was one of the most patient people I've ever encountered, given not only his tolerance for you, trying to lighten things up a little bit here, but also in extending his slightly raised eyebrow of bemused acceptance to me for so long, even to the point of letting me occupy one of the rooms in his house during the winter of my commute to a job in Cohoes that he and your mom just knew I wouldn't have been able to handle at that stage of my so-called maturation. He was certainly no pushover for all my talk of his patience, but he had a deep well of grace within him for sure. I know better than to assign meaning or irony to such random phenomena as illnesses, but it just adds an extra bit of bitterness to it that such a condition would come for such a contemplative and cerebral person as your dad. His humor was like a stalking tiger in the weeds, too. And his memory will be with me for as long as I live. I'll just leave it at that, and let you give people a teaser for our next episode.
Yep. Weird War Tales 67. As you already know, a bigger book, a cover price hike, 2 more first-time creators, and probably a bunch of other stuff I don't know, I haven't read it yet. Tune in next time, and we'll find out together.
Yes, we will. We will find out together. Together with who? With me and Rich. Who are we? You know who we are. We're the Weird Warriors. We're the Batlin Bros. And this is the Weird Warriors podcast. And it's a podcast that this time around is dedicated to Peter Fulham, Rich's dad. And it's a podcast where we promise as well to make war